In January of 1973, a woman rents an apartment in West Beirut, on a street called Verdun. She's American. She says she's a writer. She's working on a screenplay about Lady Hester Stanhope, a British aristocrat who came to Lebanon in the 1800s, dressed as a Bedouin, moved into an abandoned monastery, and declared herself queen of the desert. It's a good story. It's the kind of thing a film company might actually pay for. And more importantly, it explains why an American woman is living alone in Beirut for months with no job, no husband, and a lot of free time. The apartment she picks is nothing special. Middle floor, small balcony, view of the street. What matters is what's across the street. 2 7-story buildings standing side by side, full of families. British families, Italian families, Lebanese families, kids on the stairs, laundry on the balconies, an elderly Italian woman who has lived there for years. And in 3 of those apartments, 3 men. Every night the woman sits out on her balcony. Sometimes she reads, sometimes she writes, because writers write, and the neighbors should see her doing it. And every night she takes notes, and the notes are about light. Which windows are lit and which aren't. What time each one goes dark. Who closes the curtains. Which cars are parked out front when they move. Who gets out of them. Whether anyone is standing downstairs at night. If so, how many? If so, for how long. Whether they stay awake. She does this for 3 months. Her name is Yael Mann. She was born Eileen Steiner in Canada in 1936. She grew up in New Jersey. She wanted to be a veterinarian, and her father made her study nursing instead, so she dropped it, moved to New York, and studied psychology and computer science at Columbia. She worked as a programmer. In 1968, she moved to Israel. In 1971, she walked into Mossad through an acquaintance who worked there as a bodyguard, got interviewed by the head of the department that runs agents overseas, and got in. Inside the organization, her code name is Nielsen. Ronan Bergman, who wrote the definitive history of Israel's assassination programs and interviewed hundreds of the people who ran them, describes how she was seen internally. And the phrase that comes up is, quote, quiet charisma. Before she went, Mossad sent her to take a short course from an Israeli novelist, not on writing, on how writers live, how they spend a day, what a person working on a screenplay actually does with their hands. And on the night of April 9th, she is going to look across that street one more time, confirm that all 3 men are home, and pass the word. Then a group of men are going to walk up that street. Some of them will be wearing dresses. One of them is 31 years old, and he will be in a brunette wig, a woman's coat, and heavy makeup, standing in the middle of an intersection in Beirut with a submachine gun. 26 years later, he'll be the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, everybody tells this story as a story about disguise, and it is, but disguise is not hiding, and that distinction is the whole operation. Nobody in this story hides. The woman rents an apartment directly facing her targets and sits on the balcony in plain view for 3 months. The Mossad team flies into Beirut on fake passports, checks into a beachfront hotel, walks up to a rental counter and rents cars. The commandos walk down a public street past 3 Lebanese policemen, close enough to touch them, and the policemen don't turn their heads. Every single piece of this is built on one bet, that if people look right at you and you look like nothing, you are safer than if you were never seen at all. The bet paid. Israel still calls that night one of the best nights in its military history. It also helped destroy Lebanon. To understand why any of this happens, you have to go back 7 months to a morning in Germany, September 5th, 1972. The Olympics are in Munich. West Germany has spent years planning these games as a public apology, a way to show the world a new Germany, open and cheerful and unarmed. The security guards don't carry weapons. The fences around the athletes' village are about 6 feet high. People climb them all week. Athletes climb them coming back from bars. At around 4 in the morning, 8 men in tracksuits climb the fence carrying duffel bags. Some accounts say American athletes helped boost them over, assuming they were competitors, sneaking back in. They go to 31 Connolly Strasse, where the Israeli team is staying. They kill wrestling coach Moshe Weinberg and weightlifter Yosef Romano in the first minutes. They take 9 hostages. They're from a group calling itself Black September, named for the month in 1970 when the Jordanian army drove the Palestinian factions out of Jordan. What follows is 20 hours. The entire world watches live. 900 million people. Cameras pointed at a balcony, at a man in a white hat, at German officials walking back and forth. Then a transfer by helicopter to a military airfield called Fürstenfeldbruck, where German police have set an ambush with 5 snipers and no radios between them. Against 8 armed men, they've badly miscounted. The ambush fails. All 9 hostages are killed. 11 Israelis dead in total. And then something happens that changes everything after it. 3 of the surviving attackers are captured. 7 weeks later, a Lufthansa jet is hijacked with only a handful of passengers on board. And West Germany releases all 3 within hours. They fly to Libya and appear at a press conference to cheering crowds. In Israel, that release lands harder than the massacre. The message a lot of Israelis take from it is that no government is going to do this for them. Prime Minister Golda Meir approves a campaign run through a small secret committee to find and kill the people behind Munich and behind Black September generally. It gets called Operation Wrath of God. It will run on and off for decades. The first killings are quiet. A translator in Rome shot 11 times in his apartment lobby. A PLO representative in Paris killed by a bomb wired into his desk telephone. Small teams, silenced pistols, no fingerprints, deniable. But there's a limit to that. And the limit is Beirut. Beirut in 1973 is not the Beirut you're picturing. The civil war is still 2 years away. This is the wealthiest, most open city in the Arab world. Banks, casinos, French boutiques, ski resorts an hour outside town, women in bikinis on the beach, which in that region at that time is basically unheard of. Money comes in from all over. Journalists live there, spies live there, and the PLO lives there. After 1970, when King Hussein pushed the Palestinian factions out of Jordan, they moved north and set up in Lebanon. And because the Lebanese government is a fragile balancing act between Sunnis, Shias, Maronite Christians, and Druze, it never has the strength to say no. So the PLO effectively runs parts of South Lebanon and West Beirut, and runs operations against Israel from there. Which means the leadership isn't hiding in caves. They're living in nice apartments, in a nice neighborhood, going to work, giving interviews to newspapers. Verdun is not far from Hamra, the main shopping street, and not far from the American University. In October of 1972, Israeli intelligence gets the home addresses of 3 of them. Mohammad Youssef al-Najjar, who everyone calls Abu Youssef. He was born in a village called Yibna in 1930. In 1948, his family lost the village and ended up in the Rafah refugee camp in Gaza, where he worked as a school teacher. Then Cairo University, then a law degree, then Fatah in the late 1950s, when Fatah was a handful of men. He helped build its armed wing. By 1968, he's on the PLO Executive Committee, and he's roughly 3rd in Fatah's leadership. Israeli intelligence assesses him as the operational head of Black September. 2 months before all of this, he gives an interview to a Beirut newspaper about the Palestinian cause, and what he says is, quote, "We plant the seeds, and the others will reap the harvest." He then says most of his generation will probably die, and the young will replace them. Kamal Adwan, born 1935 in a village called Barbara, also lost in 1948, trained as an engineer, worked in the oil industry in Saudi Arabia. He's Fatah's chief of operations for the West Bank and Gaza, which means he runs the networks inside the territories, and he keeps the paperwork for those networks in his apartment. That detail is going to matter more than anyone expects. And Kamal Nasser, he's the different one. born in Gaza in 1924, raised in Beirut, Christian, educated at the American University of Beirut. He was a teacher of Arabic literature. He published poetry and short stories in his 20s. He got elected to the Jordanian parliament in 1956 and thrown out of it under martial law. Israel expelled him from the West Bank in 1967. By 1973, he's the PLO's spokesman and the editor of its magazine. And he's the man who writes the editorials that become the movement's official positions. He's also known among Palestinians by a nickname given to him by one of Arafat's deputies, the Conscience. He said openly that he was too afraid to carry a gun and that the pen was his weapon. I'm telling you that because the case for killing the first two men is a case about operations, and the case for killing the third man is a case about a spokesman. Those are not the same case. Israeli decision-makers treated the PLO leadership as one connected body and made no distinction. Palestinians did not see it that way then, and don't now. In Arabic, this operation isn't called Spring of Youth. It's called the Verdun Massacre. Both of those descriptions are describing exactly the same 20 minutes. Quick pause before we get into how they actually pulled it off. If this is the kind of thing you like, a like genuinely helps this stuff get in front of people, and subscribing means you get the next one. What's coming up is the part that usually gets skipped, because it isn't the shooting. It's about a plan that nearly didn't happen at all. So Israel has the addresses. The problem is what to do with them. Mossad looks at it and concludes, it can't. The buildings are packed with civilians, so a bomb is out. Because a bomb in a 7-story residential block kills families. That means it has to be close range, which means somebody has to walk into those apartments. The Mossad agents already living in Lebanon are deep cover surveillance people. They aren't trained for that, and burning them would cost years of work. Mossad's own assassination unit could do it, but they have no plausible reason to be in Lebanon, no cover that survives a week, and worst of all, no way out. You can shoot a man in Rome and be in Paris by breakfast. Beirut is not Rome. Beirut is a city where the borders that matter are a war zone and a sea. So the conclusion is that Mossad cannot do this alone. This has to be the army. The army's first plan is bad. About 100 soldiers surround both buildings. Wake up everyone inside, herd all the residents down into the street, and hold a lineup to pick the 3 men out of the crowd. The chief of staff, David Elazar, hears it and doesn't like it. Too slow. Too many civilians. Too many minutes standing in a foreign capital waiting for someone to call the police. So he goes to a 31-year-old lieutenant colonel who commands Sayeret Matkal, the army's most secretive unit, and asks him for something better. That's Ehud Barak. Barak reads the intelligence and comes back with the opposite of the first plan. Not 100 men, 20 odd, not an hour, minutes. Go in small, hit all 3 apartments simultaneously, and be gone before anybody with a weapon can organize a response. He builds the whole thing around a number, and the number is roughly 20 minutes from the first shot to the first serious reinforcement. The route in is the sea. Missile boats from Haifa to a point off the coast, then rubber Zodiacs, then a beach. But there's a gap in the middle. The beach is roughly 10 kilometers from Verdun. You can't walk that. You need cars, and you need drivers who know Beirut the way locals know Beirut. At night, at speed, under pressure. That's Mossad's job. Their people fly in ahead of time and have the cars sitting there. And then Elazar adds the piece everybody remembers. His concern is simple and completely practical. A group of fit young men walking through Beirut at midnight with bulky coats looks exactly like what it is. Beirut at midnight is a city full of couples. So make some of them women, which is how you get an operation where the commander of Israel's most elite unit spends part of the night in a wig. They rehearse it in North Tel Aviv, and the rehearsal is almost funnier than the operation. They land on the beach at Tel Baruch in Tel Aviv, in the dark, in disguise. Rented cars pick them up and drive them to a nearby neighborhood where they split into squads, find the right doorways, and go up into apartment buildings that were chosen because their internal layout matches the buildings on Verdun Street. Israeli intelligence has the actual architectural plans, so the men memorize the floor plans of the apartments they're going to enter, where the corridor turns, where the office is, which door is the bedroom. They also practice the walking, men holding other men who are dressed as women, strolling, leaning in, taking their time. That's a skill, and it's a skill that fails badly if you rush it. Muki Betzer, who's leading one of the assault teams, calls his men together shortly before. In his memoir, he lays out what he told them. Unusual operation. A civilian target in the middle of a city. The targets have guards, and the targets themselves may be armed. Civilians live all around them and cannot be harmed. Then the line that's meant to settle it, which is that the best intelligence they have is that these are, quote, people with blood on their hands. At the last moment, another officer asks to come along, and Betzer takes him. His name is Yoni Netanyahu. He'll die 3 years later, commanding the rescue at Entebbe. Meanwhile in Beirut, Yael Mann has spent 3 months turning a street into a document. Her reporting isn't dramatic. It's the daily and nightly routine of 3 apartments. When the lights come on and when they go off. Who you can see moving behind the windows and at what hours. The cars, the visitors, whether there's security and when. She also scouts the water, because somebody has to pick where 75 men come out of the sea, and she picks the private beach of the Sands Hotel for a reason that's almost embarrassingly practical. It's a private beach, so random people don't wander onto it. And it's right next to the hotel parking lot, which is where the cars will be. On April 6th, 6 more Mossad operatives fly into Beirut on forged British, German, and Belgian passports. They check into the Sands. They go out and rent cars, big American sedans, and park them in the lot. 3 days later, on April 9th, 8 Israeli missile boats leave Haifa. On board are 75 soldiers, 21 from Sayeret Matkal, 34 naval commandos, 20 paratroopers, and 19 Zodiacs. It's a 7-hour trip. They drop anchor 12 miles off Beirut, and then everything waits on one woman looking out a window. One of the Mossad men at the hotel meets with her. She confirms it. All 3 are home. That gets radioed out to the boats 12 miles offshore, and the operation starts. The Zodiacs go in. A few hundred meters from shore, they cut the engines and row the rest of the way, because an outboard motor at night carries across water for miles. Then a detail I love, because it tells you how completely they had thought this through. The naval commandos physically carry the disguised men from the boats onto dry sand. They pick them up, specifically the ones dressed as women, because they're wearing heavy makeup, and if they come out of the surf soaked, the makeup runs, the wigs sit wrong, and the entire disguise is finished before it starts. They walk up to the parking lot, the cars are there, the drivers are there, and immediately there's a problem. Word comes in that 3 Lebanese policemen are patrolling on foot in front of the target buildings. That was not in the plan. Barak has a choice, and the choice is really about who he calls. If he radios headquarters in Israel and reports armed police standing on the objective, there's a good chance somebody senior cancels the whole thing. He doesn't call. He decides to keep going. The cars drop the assault teams 2 blocks short, and they get out and walk. Couples, arm in arm, out for the night. They pass the policeman. Nothing happens. The policemen see 3 couples on a Beirut street at midnight, which is the most ordinary thing in the world, and look at something else. At the buildings, they split. 3 teams go up, 1 team stays down. The team that stays is Barak and Amiram Levin and a doctor, and their job is to hold the street. Inside the lobbies, there's nobody. The PLO guards they had planned for and rehearsed against are asleep in their cars outside. Each team climbs to its floor, half running, and tapes an explosive charge to the door of its target's apartment. Then each team signals down to the street with 3 clicks on a radio. No voices, 3 clicks. Barak waits until he has 3 clicks from all 3 teams. Then he sends back 5 clicks, which means go, and he sends a separate signal out to the sea, which starts every other Israeli attack happening in Lebanon that night. The charges blow the doors in. Betzer is in Abu Yusef's apartment. He knows the layout by heart from the rehearsals in Tel Aviv, so he doesn't have to think, he just runs the pattern. Down the corridor, past the office with the filing cabinets, and he registers the cabinets because military intelligence has told them to bring back every piece of paper they can carry. Then the bedroom door opens, and Abu Yusef is standing there, and Betzer says the face is instantly familiar because he's had that photograph in his shirt pocket for 3 weeks. Abu Yusef slams the door and shuts himself in a side room with his wife. Betzer and another commando fire through the door. Both of them are killed. Betzer is supposed to collect the documents. He doesn't. They're shooting outside now, loud, and he decides the street matters more than the paperwork and takes his men down the stairs. In the second apartment, Kamal Adwan comes out of his door holding an AK-47 and is shot immediately in front of his wife. His team does take the documents, and that turns out to be the most consequential thing anybody carries out of Beirut that night. In the third, Kamal Nasser is at his desk. He has a pistol. He fires, and he hits one of the commandos in the leg, and then he's killed. Palestinian accounts of his death, including from Arafat's deputy Salah Khalaf, describe the wounds as deliberately arranged, bullets fired around his mouth because he was the spokesman, and his body laid out in the shape of a cross because he was Christian. Israeli accounts describe a man who drew a weapon in a 2-second exchange in the dark. I don't think there's a way to settle that from the outside, but it's part of the story as Palestinians have told it for 50 years, and it belongs here. And in one of the buildings, a 79-year-old Italian woman comes out into the hallway to see what the noise is, and she's shot and killed. Outside, the street has come apart. One of the sleeping guards wakes up, gets out of his car with a pistol drawn, and Barak and Levin shoot him. But one of the rounds hits the car and jams the horn on, and it just holds. One continuous note in the middle of a residential neighborhood at midnight. Windows open. People start calling the police. There's a police station close by. Within minutes, there are dozens of Lebanese gendarmes converging on Verdun Street, and this becomes a straight firefight in an intersection. Betzer comes out of the building into it. He describes a police Land Rover on fire rolling through the intersection, and Amiram Levin standing out in the open in a blonde wig, turning, firing, turning again, and Barak doing the same from the other side. A jeep full of reinforcements comes into the intersection, and Betzer throws a grenade at it and kills 3 of the 4 men inside. 2 Lebanese policemen die in the street. Then the Mossad cars come screaming back in, and the commandos load up and go. On the way out, they drop spikes in the road behind them to blow the tires of anything chasing. Betzer says nobody in his car said anything. No celebrating. Everyone sat quietly watching the windows. Then, on the road down to the water, they come around a bend, and there is a Lebanese army armored personnel carrier sitting there, scanning the shoreline. Full crew, heavy weapons. 3 cars full of Israeli commandos drive past it. The APC does not react. Nobody has told the Lebanese army anything yet, and what it sees is 3 civilian cars going toward the beach. They reach the sand, abandon the cars, get in the Zodiacs, and go. The whole thing took about 30 minutes instead of 20. But that's only half of what happened in Beirut that night, and the other half went almost exactly the way you'd expect a raid to go. While Sayeret Matkal was in the apartments, 14 commandos, mostly paratroopers, hit a multi-story building in Beirut used by the Popular Front for the liberation of Palestine, the faction most associated with hijacking airliners. They're led by Amnon Lipkin Shahak, and they are outnumbered roughly 7-1. The building has close to 100 armed men in it. The fight starts at the entrance and goes bad fast. 3 Israelis are badly wounded in the opening minutes. And then it turns into something out of a nightmare because the PFLP fighters on the upper floors keep coming down in the elevator, and the commandos are standing next to the elevator doors, and every group that arrives is killed as the doors open. Then the next group gets in the elevator. There's a moment in the middle of this I can't get out of my head. One of the wounded Israelis is being carried out by a naval commando, and a PFLP fighter runs over to help. Because in the dark he assumes the man being carried is one of his own. He grabs at the wounded man, realizes something's wrong, wrestles with the commando, and runs. Lipkin Shahak is told the building is compromised and they've been discovered, and he orders them to finish it anyway. They place a large charge inside, pull back, and the charge brings down part of the building. But at the pickup point, one of the 3 cars is missing. The Mossad driver, carrying 2 of the wounded, panicked under the gunfire and drove off toward the beach on his own, and the force has a doctor with them. And the wounded do not. Lipkin Shahak refuses to leave without accounting for his men. They search, they don't find the car, and eventually he has to give the order to withdraw anyway. He gets a Medal of Valor for that night. They find the missing car at the beach. One of the wounded men is already dead from blood loss. The second dies on the operating table after they get back to the ships. Their names were Avida Shor and Haggai Mayan. Elsewhere that same night, other Israeli units hit a Fatah headquarters, a weapons workshop, an explosives workshop in North Beirut, and the PLO's main vehicle garage south of Sidon. And back in Beirut, in an apartment on Verdun Street, Yael Man does nothing at all. That's the part that gets me. She doesn't leave. She stays for 5 more days in the building directly facing 3 apartments now full of investigators and mourners and journalists, and she keeps doing exactly what an American screenwriter researching Lady Hester Stanhope would be doing. Same routine, same hours. Then she flies to Brussels, alone. A month later, the head of Mossad and the head of his operations division take her to meet Golda Meir. The reason given was so the Prime Minister could see what a female fighter looked like. Now here's what happens next, and this is where the story stops being about a raid. On April 12th, they hold the funeral in Beirut. 250,000 people come out. That is roughly 10% of the entire population of Lebanon in the streets behind flag-draped coffins. Tens of thousands more turn out elsewhere in the country. And the political effect of that is immediate, because the raid answered a question Lebanon had been avoiding for 3 years. The question was whether the Lebanese state actually controlled Lebanon. Everybody already suspected the answer, but now Israeli commandos had come ashore, driven 10 kilometers into the capital, fought the police in a street, and driven back out. And the Lebanese army had literally watched 3 of their cars go by and done nothing. The army was not heard from. The Sunni Prime Minister, Saeb Salam, demanded the dismissal of the army commander. The Maronite president, Suleiman Frangieh, refused because the army commander was his ally. So Salam resigned, and his whole cabinet went with him. Less than a month later, in May, the Lebanese army and the Palestinian factions were fighting each other outright. That fighting ended in a stalemate, and the stalemate produced the worst possible outcome, which is that Frangieh had to publicly concede that the Lebanese army could not protect the Palestinian camps. And having conceded that, he had to let the PLO bring in heavier weapons and build its own fortifications to protect them. So the sequence is this. Israel proves the Lebanese state can't defend its own capital. The Lebanese state, having been proven weak, is forced to formally allow an armed foreign movement to arm itself further on Lebanese soil. Every faction in Lebanon watches this happen and reaches the same conclusion, which is that if the state can't protect anyone, everyone needs their own militia. 2 years later, the civil war starts. It lasts 15 years and kills something like 150,000 people. The historian Dan Naor, who went through the Lebanese, British, American, and Israeli archives on exactly this question, is careful about it, and I want to be careful about it too. He doesn't say Israel caused the Lebanese civil war. He says the collision between the Lebanese state and the Palestinian factions was probably coming anyway. What he says is that the success of this operation hastened it, and that word success is the whole thing. Because tactically this was close to flawless. 3 targets, 3 kills, 30 minutes, 2 Israeli dead in the hardest part of the night, and a commander who walked through a police cordon in a wig. Israel got something real out of it too. The documents taken from Kamal Adwan's apartment turned out to be a full picture of Fatah's networks in the West Bank and Gaza, and Israel used them to run a wave of arrests that gutted that network. That's not symbolic. That's the most valuable thing anyone carried out of Beirut. But the reason Israel went in the first place was deterrence. The idea was to make it clear that no one involved in Munich was safe anywhere, and that this would make the attacks stop. The attacks did not stop. Israeli deterrence held briefly, and then the operations resumed. And 6 months after Verdun Street, Israel was fighting the Yom Kippur War and had much bigger problems. 3 months after Verdun Street, a Mossad team in Norway shot a Moroccan waiter named Ahmed Bouchiki in front of his pregnant wife because they thought he was somebody else, and 6 of them were arrested, and Golda Meir suspended the entire campaign. So the operation achieved everything it aimed at and did not achieve what it was for. And the thing it did achieve, unintentionally, was to knock out a supporting wall in a country that was already leaning. Which brings me back to where we started. And the thing about this operation I actually find remarkable. It ran on being visible. A woman on a balcony, writing in a notebook where the neighbors could see her. Men holding hands on a public street, cars rented at a counter with a signature. An armored personnel carrier looking straight at 3 getaway vehicles and seeing 3 civilians going for a swim. Not one person in this operation hid from anybody. And then, at 250,000 people deep in the streets of Beirut 3 days later, the same operation became the most visible thing in the country. And what everybody could suddenly see was that Lebanon could not defend itself. You can hide a lot of things from a population. You cannot hide that. The people from that night mostly went on to run Israel. Ehud Barak became chief of staff, then prime minister. Amnon Lipkin Shahak became chief of staff and later a government minister. Amiram Levine, the man in the blonde wig standing in the intersection, became a major general and then deputy head of Mossad. Muki Betzer wrote a memoir. Yoni Netanyahu died at Entebbe in 1976, and his younger brother Benjamin entered politics partly because of it. Yael Man served 15 more years in Mossad. When she retired, she married her Hebrew teacher, a man she'd met not long before she left. She never became famous. Israel didn't tell her story publicly until decades later, and even then, mostly under a code name. She died in August of 2021, at 84, in the country she'd moved to on her own in her 30s, after deciding she was done being a computer programmer in New York. The buildings are still on Verdun Street. Beirut has been through a civil war, an invasion, an occupation, more wars, and an explosion in the port since then. There's no plaque, but in Israel this is taught as one of the finest operations the army ever ran. And in the Arab world, the same night has a different name and gets remembered as the night Israeli soldiers walked into a residential building in a friendly capital and shot a poet at his desk and a 79-year-old woman in a hallway. I don't think either of those accounts is being dishonest. They're both describing the same 30 minutes on the same street. They just start counting at different places. That's the story. If you made it this far, you're clearly into this stuff. So, hit subscribe, and I'll have another one of these for you soon. And there's a video on your screen right now that YouTube thinks you should watch next. Go ahead.